Good afternoon and welcome to Foundations of Project Alignment. I'm Saralina, I'll be moderating this session, and I'd like to hand it over to Hannah to do her introduction and to get this started. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm realizing that the title of my presentation and that Sarah just introduced is slightly different from the title that we have here, but I think both apply. What I have here is a framework for stakeholder alignment, project alignment, stakeholder alignment. It's, as we'll find out, spoiler alert, they're pretty same in the end. So I will just really briefly introduce myself before we jump in. I'm Hannah Kinley. I'm a project manager in Do It Academic Technology. I've been with academic technology for about 4 years, working in educational technologies in a university or nonprofit setting for about 10 years, and project and product management positions for the course of that time. So I'm going to jump right in. And now I can't change my slide. Here we go. Okay, quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about what alignment means. What is it? Why do we care? How do we build alignment in from the beginning of a project? How do we recognize when we are seeing misalignment? And how alignment goes wrong? And then finally, how do we get back into alignment? Right, jumping right into defining stakeholder alignment. So who are stakeholders? It can be anyone with a vested interest in the success of a project. So that could be the project teams, the technical teams, the leadership folks who are running a project, the project manager. All of the above can be stakeholders in a project. So really anyone that a project is touching would be considered a stakeholder in this context. And stakeholder alignment is when all the stakeholders are sharing the same definition of success for a given project. So making sure that everyone sees the same end goal and everyone is working toward that. Why do we care about stakeholder alignment? According to Gartner, which is a source, relatively well established in the field, the 20% increase in product development cycles in research and development organizations when stakeholder alignment is established. So, not all of us and not the whole university is working in a research and development organization, but at an aspirational level, I think, an increase in product development and processes is generally a good thing that can be sort of extrapolated beyond that environment. Okay, what is alignment? Digging into that a little bit more. So we're going to dig into what alignment is in the stakeholder sense and the project sense across the course of a project. We start from alignment and then we get to project outcomes. So how do we get there? If we want everyone to be agreed on what the project outcomes for the project are going to be, how do we establish that? Some things that are fundamental, in my opinion, to building the alignment in project outcomes amongst stakeholders can be the scope and the requirements for a project, the capacity and resources required to complete a project, the timeline, so that everyone knows when it needs to be completed, and the budget to accomplish all of those things. Once you're able to put all of those together and in one place, then there's sort of the bigger task of buy-in, sometimes the bigger task of buy-in amongst all of the stakeholders. So that, again, that could be project leadership or, campus leadership, the project team, technical team, whoever is going to, be having a vested interest in the project outcomes, as we discussed before. And buy-in, that usually means not only understanding all of these aspects, but also there's generally sign-off and decision-making around this. There might be opportunities for feedback and changing, some aspects of these to fit the resourcing availability. There's a little bit of give and take between these. It's not a truly linear process. But one thing to keep in mind over the course of this process, as you're going through the sort of swirl of really figuring out what the scope of work is and what the outcomes are going to be, is keeping in mind that project outcomes need to be realistic at the end of the day. So I think sometimes we get into a space where the scope of work or some aspect of all of those four things are aspirational in some way, maybe not realistic. They're more of an ideal. So, over the course of this process of defining these, getting feedback, identifying who was available when, on what timeline and what budget, going back to those project outcomes throughout the process to say, can we still achieve this outcome on this timeline? Can we still achieve this outcome with the people on this project? That's an important aspect, and making sure that you have full buy-in over the course of the process. So in order to get that alignment, and the project team that you're working with, something that I find to be really fundamental is sending out some foundations for how to work with a project team and work with the people involved in this whole process. Because really, at the end of the day, you're working with people and you're trying to get everyone on the same page, to be in alignment with the project. So some things that I find important when you're setting up a project team and getting the project set up and aligned is clear communication. I will say that I used to have this as open communication. I think that's important too, although perhaps more covered in transparency here further down the list. Clear communication, I think, is actually more important. And for any Brene Brown fans out there, as she says often, clear is kind. And that is something that I lean into more and more every day. The more clear you can be in your communication and how you're talking about the work and the specifics and how you communicate it, the better, I find. And if you can build that in from the very beginning of a project, you're just going to set yourself up for better success. I am still learning that and will probably continue learning it over the course of my career. Trust is a really fundamental piece to working with a project team that you can stay aligned with. So there's a lot of ways to build trust. There's a lot of ways that trust can get sort of undermined. That can be a really hard one. We'll talk about some ways to establish these things in a minute here. Transparency across the team, who's doing what, how you're handling things at a higher level, how different project teams are handling things. That's a really important aspect here. And then something a little more tangible is decision-making processes. That's just a really important thing to establish up front, I've found. You don't want to get to the point where you need a decision-making process and you don't have one. Obviously, it happens, and there are ways to handle that, but it's really helpful when you just establish that up front. So some strategies to accomplish those things. In order to establish clear communication, a project charter is a really great way to start, although that can be something that you build in across the course of the project and probably is really fundamental to all of these other things that I'm talking about. In a project charter, for those who maybe don't live in project management land like I do, would be, usually just a document agreeing to the scope of the work, all of those things that were in that previous slide, the scope of work, who's going to be on the project, who the stakeholders are, what the timeline is, what the budget is, all of those things that everyone just agrees to and signs off on. It just really establishes a great starting point for a project and a great reference point moving forward. In terms of establishing trust, something that I find is really a tangible way to work on that from the beginning is having regular team check-ins. That helps keep everyone on track. That helps you check in with how people are doing. That helps people develop a little bit of a relationship on the project, and hopefully, trust each other to move forward, that people are accomplishing things, that they can trust, that they can, rely on other members of this team, especially if it's maybe a cross-functional project where people aren't always working together as often. They don't have that established basis for working within their team. Establishing transparency. So public notes places, I often use like a Google Drive, that's open to everyone on the project. Action items, work plans, having everything in the same place where everyone can find it. So there's just no secrets about what you're accomplishing and when. And if anyone has questions, they know where to go. And, if they have questions about it, they can bring that to the project manager or other stakeholders on the team to have a conversation. And then decision-making process, perhaps a little bit repetitive here, but define a decision-making process. I've seen anything from, for a very detailed decision-making process. So for X, Y, and Z types of issues, we will take those to this leadership team. For A, B, and C issues, we'll take those to the project team, and et cetera, things like that are really detailed. Or just, this is the decision-making body, the ultimate decision-making body on this project, and maybe things get escalated through a process if they are decided that they need to be taken to that higher level, or that decisions can be kept within a project team as they're working through issues. But again, deciding that upfront can be really helpful. So things aren't always going to go perfectly, even if you build it in from the beginning. How do you recognize misalignment? This is, it can be something that you just have to try to discover, and it could just be a feeling. But sometimes it's sort of accompanied by other things that you're seeing. So a lack of momentum on the project usually can be a sign of misalignment. If not everyone is agreeing on the same end goal, then probably there's not going to be as much progress. Spinning on a project, coming back to the same issues over and over, probably an aspect of misalignment. Revisiting old decisions that have already been made. Minimal participation in team meetings, that can indicate a lot of things, but misalignment might be one thing. And deadline slipping, which sort of overlaps with some of these other things, lack of momentum, things like that. So these are just some aspects. There are a lot of things that could indicate misalignment. I cannot list them all here because I'm sure I haven't even experienced all of them. Maybe if you have anything that you have seen as an aspect of misalignment that you've seen in projects that you've run in the past, feel free to drop it in the chat so that everyone can try to learn from each other. So we're going to talk a little bit about how alignment can go wrong and what the impacts can be when that happens. So usually when alignment goes wrong, it's with one of these fundamental 4 things that I have listed. It might be that the scope is out of alignment, capacity, timeline, budget. If we see one thing out of alignment, you're going to have, maybe that's going to have one impact, but often that leads to a number of other things getting out of alignment. If the scope isn't quite covering all of the things that need to get done or is too broad for the timeline, then you're going to have this sort of waterfall effect of these other things falling out of alignment. If there's too many things, not enough people, then not enough people is out of alignment and the timeline becomes out of alignment. And then you're going to lose some buy-in from stakeholders, and those project outcomes are not going to be as viable anymore and not as realistic, as we discussed was pretty important in the beginning. So briefly about what some common drivers of alignment going wrong can be. So I've seen on our campus and in other jobs, new regulations. There can be things that are totally out of the control of this project. And often they are, right? There's just new things that come in that you could never have foreseen that are just going to drive some changes in some aspect of the project that you established. So if there's a new regulation that changes the scope of the work that you needed to complete, then that there's going to be misalignment. You're going to have to figure that out. Campus initiatives, those come and go on a regular basis here. So that could be a cause. Staffing changes, people are hired, people leave. Those can impact timeline and capacity and competing priorities. So if you weren't able to get everyone on the, again, especially in a cross-functional area, if you weren't able to get everyone on that cross-functional team prioritizing this work, and then there's a competing priority, that can be, that's one that I've seen often. It's just a really hard one to foresee coming, and you can't always do anything about it up front. So how do we get back in alignment? The next question here. Go back to our foundations, right? You want clear communication, trust, transparency, decision-making processes in order to build back the fundamentals of that project. So hopefully no one can hear it. My dog is barking in the background, slightly distracting for me. So if we're getting back in alignment, how do we do that? Actually taking the steps. I've talked a little bit at sort of the higher level about these pieces. But I do have some more tangible concepts for how to tackle these things and get everyone back on the same page. So if we think back about, go back a slide here, if we think about those foundations, how do we actually in practice get that team to re-agree or agree again on the same thing when it comes to the project outcomes and then the 4 critical pieces of a project. Here's what I've seen work and what the goal I've seen from that base. So talking to the team members, right, that's going to get a little bit of clear communication, transparency, maybe identify some issues and what they're feeling, find out what's on their minds, a really open conversation about, hey, I'm seeing this or I'm feeling that. Is anyone else feeling that? How do we move forward from here? Is there something that people are missing? How can I support the project and moving forward? How can we all work toward a goal that that feels like the right thing? That can be a way to accomplish this. Another idea is to bring the feedback and ideas that you're hearing from the project team members back to project leadership. So especially if this is something with maybe some really involved sponsors at the campus level who have a lot of input on the direction of the project, talking to team members, find out what's on their mind, synthesize that into real concepts and next steps and take that to leadership to identify a solution so that you can figure out, can we pull one of those project levers? Like, can we pull the timeline lever? Can we make it a longer timeline? Can we pull the budget lever, make it a bigger budget? Something like that. And then another option is to just change the project outcomes. If we can't change our resourcing, our timeline, or our budget, then let's reevaluate the scope and what the project outcome might be. And that could be another way to level set the whole group moving forward. Then propose the changes from the project leadership to the full project team. So this is really building in and reinforcing the transparency aspect instead of just bringing back, okay, this is what we're going to do to move forward. Getting some candid feedback from the full project team about, here's what we're proposing doing. We're planning on extending the timeline for X period of time. By doing that, we think that we can work with our fewer resources or our smaller budget or whatever it is to accomplish the end project goal. But get candid feedback from the people, the project team that you're working with to figure out if that's actually going to address the issues that they're seeing. And there might have to be some back and forth, some building up of what that actual proposed change should be and how it's actually going to set the team up for success. Well, look at that. That's step 4. Listen to the feedback from the project team and repeat as needed. With the end goal here being implementing the right solution, right? It can be easy to, maybe not easy, but sometimes I have myself and I've seen others fall into the pattern of, you start with something really lofty, you realize realistically you need to change the timeline or the scope or the project goals. And that it sort of turns into a spiral of just trying to make something happen. If you're losing resources or if other priorities on campus are changing or something like that, and you just get really far removed from implementing the right solution. So sometimes it can be helpful to take a step back with whatever teams are relevant at that point to say, what are we doing here and is it the right thing? Is it really going to accomplish the goal we think it is? Is it really having the strategic impact we want it to? In some instances, that's really clear with a really specific, maybe technical solution. It's just really clear what the outcome needs to be, and maybe you are implementing the right solution just on a longer timeline. Sometimes it's a little bit more amorphous, and it can take having a little more conversation about what is important here, why are we doing it, and how can we redefine a goal that is really going to support campus and the users that we're working with here. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself, turn on your video.
No questions. Really appreciate your approach to talking through the concepts of like looking for misalignment, really giving a solid foundation of project management best practices. And a lot of the information you gave me really resonated with me, right? Because when groups are, going through stages of forming, norming, and performing, like all of those things you talk to alignment also talk to like what can happen in those different stages. And I really appreciated it. Gave me a lot to think about too.
Great. So happy it could help some folks.
Well, I just put something in the chat. I'm Robert Merrill from Do It PPMO. It seems like misalignment is almost like the natural state of projects. We don't know enough at the beginning, at least on the projects I tend to be on. And I'm a BA, not a PM, so I try to set them up. And we just don't know enough. So you sort of just, you're not really, you think you're in alignment, but then you discover you're not. So it's not even that anything changed. You just learned.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot too. I work on projects where often you just don't know. Yeah.
And I think people expect certainty at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even try to decree it in the charter or something, and then it just doesn't happen. And that's really nobody's fault. And that's like the hardest thing I think to get across. And I guess I've lived my, a long time in like that upfront phase. And it's just all that ambiguity and the longing for certainty when it's just not there, and working through that. Yeah.
Have you ever found any success with, stating explicitly in something like a project charter that there will be ambiguity?
All the time, and people read it and they nod their heads and they agree and they understand it in their heads, but then they feel it and they just, whoa, this feels uncomfortable. I want to make this, I want to clamp this. I want to make this predictable.
Scary.
And you got to walk with them and acknowledge that we're passing through this stage now where things are just going to be changing around, and we got to keep our eyes on what the overall purpose is, and realize that we're never going to know less than we do today.
Yeah,
and
that's a great way to frame it.
So it's always, yeah. That's also kind of the fun part too, is watching it take shape, watching it get clear.
I agree.
And hoping that there is something for people to align around still. Okay, now this is all coming together and it's starting to feel good.
Yeah.
But this is a great step-by-step. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, great. I'm glad that it's resonating with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mary, you're in the same boat. Like watching things become clear.
Yeah.
Does anyone
just thinking,
oh, sorry.
No, it's all right. I was just gonna pontificate for just a half a second. In that phase of not knowing, I've seen sometimes, I don't think it's always possible, but sometimes putting a charter or a piece of work around the discovery portion of it to say, during this portion, we know that there's going to be a whole bunch of uncertainty.
Okay.
And then, and that really sets people up for it. And then hopefully by the end of that, set some tangible goals. The problem is you can't always set tangible goals around a discovery piece of work, but then hopefully by the end of that, you have something to move forward from. Again, that doesn't always work, but it's something I have seen work in some contexts.
Yeah. Oh, it didn't sound like pontificating. That sounded like very practical advice.
Agreed. I like to revisit what we know. Like, what do we do? What do we know? What do we know? And look at this progress we've made, and then to your point, then realigning right on those next steps. It's nice, kind of grounds everyone.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I'll do a little editorial. Maybe this will be pontificating.
Right.
One of the things that drew me to Agile years ago, to Agile methods, where they're applicable, and they're not always. But where there's some ambiguity that you just can't avoid, and where maybe a partial solution is still valuable. The realignment process is like built right into a framework like Scrum. I mean, just the way it works. You don't even have a separate, oh, it's out of alignment. It just gradually works its way into alignment because you have your 2-week cadence and you're pulling things into the sprints and seeing how fast we're going. And it's just integral. And I found sometimes that helps because it doesn't, out of alignment doesn't feel like something has gone wrong that we need to fix. We're constantly realigning, and it's just part of how we do the work. It doesn't help the problem at the beginning if people really want certainty.
Yeah, if you don't know what to pull into a sprint.
Yeah. Well, the first one's a
Hard.
wild guess, right?
That's true. Yeah.
But after you've done a couple, then
There was a lot in what you said in your presentation about styles of leadership as well. So I think some of the things that I took from it too, where there were hues of like transition, hues of going from like task-oriented leadership to going towards delegated leadership, but you really did hone in on some really best practices around participating leadership, especially in the discussion we just had with Robert, right? Participating leadership is recognizing a misalignment and then participating and acting on that to help bring people back into alignment.
Mm-hmm.
So again, more thoughts, just processing information, sharing hopefully what feels like positive feedback.
Yeah, it's great. And it's, I think you're right. There's a lot of, I mean, I built this presentation based on a really specific experience and then have sort of built it out over a lot of other experiences. And it's interesting to think about those aspects of it that I hadn't explicitly thought about, but are definitely built into what I'm talking about here.
I like that the project charter evolves some, because I always thought it was a very concrete, it had to be. And
well, you know, I might get a little bit, get my head bitten off on campus sometimes for saying that, but I think there's an opportunity for it as long as you can get everyone on the same page, right?
I think of the charter like the Constitution. You don't put too much
Add
detail in
amendments.
it. You don't put too much detail in it, and it can be amended.
Mm-hmm.
Things change. And if the map doesn't match the landscape, you need to change the map.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But charters are important.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Feelings? Quantification?
I think this has been a great session. And thank you very much for presenting in the IT Professionals Conference. And thank you to everyone who came to see it. And if you are in the Madison area, please feel free to go down to the in-person event. It looks like Amanda Thornton has already gotten a couple tables down there at the terrace. So if you want to join in, they're already there waiting for you. So thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.